My purpose was I just wanted to get closer to helping people. It took me a long time of thinking and translating it, but basically what it came down to was, running an oil field isn't that much different than running an app.
Okay, hi, I'm Greg Smythe, bringing you weekly videos on how to be successful in a Fortune 500 company. Although a big part of what I'm doing is focused on career pivots, and I've shared a lot of my story through my YouTube channel and LinkedIn. Adrian Leung reached out to me and wanted to share his story from a recent career pivot from the oil industry into a tech role. And I thought I'd share his story in this Q&A. So first of all, thank you to Adrian for reaching out to me, and thanks for making the time today.
I was reservoir / production engineer in the oil industry. So I was working for Imperial Oil. The majority shareholder of them is ExxonMobil. So, we do come from very similar backgrounds as well.
Yeah.
But, in last December, they were actually announcing layoffs, and, I just happened to be one of them. So that, on the surface, that's kind of where it seemed like my pivot started, but I would actually say my pivot started way, before my layoff. I was already kind of looking to do something different, and I did do my MBA while I was still working in the oil industry. And in one of my marketing classes, one of my instructors had a very interesting quote where, engineers like to build things, but they're really useless if nobody actually buys them. So that really resonated with me. And that just really, got me thinking about, I really want to, look to build things that are very useful to people. So after I was laid off, I was, looking to do that pivot into the tech industry because I really wanted to make an impact for people. And that's where I discovered the product management role. And essentially what you're really doing is trying to figure out the problems that people have and try to solve them with technology. So so then I got into a product operations management role at ATB Financial. So that's a regional bank here in Alberta. And I'm now helping develop their banking technology.
So let's talk, what do you think, you maybe touched on it, but can you talk more specifically what motivated you to make the change? I had a similar sentiment that I had a very exhilarating time early in my career. And I think over the 10 years, I kind of slowly fell out of love with maybe the company and industry. But I was always obsessed with Silicon Valley and tech, and then really got obsessed with Elon, and Tesla was really the thing that compelled me as a part of that. And I'm curious now, what was that? Was there an underlying motivation there? Or if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure. And very similar to you, when I first started in the oil industry, it was a lot of fun. I was learning a lot. I got to work in the field for 4 years. So you're right in bed with operations as an engineer. That was absolutely a blast. And after my field time, I went back to the headquarters near here in Calgary, and, things just stopped, to lose luster. Things kind of got, I was, a little bit demotivated and, just looking for a change. Right. And, throughout my, self-discovery journey after I was laid off, I was, what I discovered was I was just really looking for a purpose, right? That I wanted to pivot. And my purpose was I just wanted to get closer to helping people.
Yeah. I think even, especially as a reservoir engineer, you are so far from the gas pump, or from the consumer. It's like,
absolutely.
Drilling engineer is not that different. And I totally get that you really are not, you're not it's still very technically challenging roles, but you're not customer people facing kind of industry. So I can really understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just, figuring out how to get oil out of the ground. And, as a drilling engineer, you're just putting holes in the ground to get the oil out of the ground. And
I used to tell people I drill really expensive holes in the ground, is what I used to tell when I first got here.
And whenever I tell people what I do as reservoir engineer, I'd say I figure out how to get oil out of the ground. And, at the core, that's really what it was. And, it was really hard to, stay engaged that way. And, trying to wonder, what kind of value, like aside from corporate value, what kind of impact I was making in this world. You're still far away from that.
Reservoir engineering feels very specialized, and I'm curious to know how you summarize, and then the part that a lot of people, I don't even think they realize they need to do, but to kind of translate that experience into the core skills of what a reservoir engineer is, and then translate them into a product manager role, or and how those skills can be applicable to the banking industry.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I did work in the field for 4 years. It took me a long time of thinking and translating it, but basically what it came down to was, running an oil field isn't that much different than running an app. Yeah, I think it really boiled down to, how you articulate your experiences, and does take a lot of work to, phrase and, tell that story correctly, right? And, I have worked a lot on that story. And, part of it is, first knowing what the role is and why it's important and what exactly they're looking for, right? And basically, as a product operations manager, what it kind of boiled down to was you're using data to enable product managers, right? So the way I kind of phrased it was, as a reservoir production engineer in the field, I was there using data to enable operations to make the decisions, right?
Yeah.
And basically said, I am not new to using data to enable things, right? And when you kind of phrase it that way, you didn't need to really get into the technical nitty gritties, but, I think people can kind of, get the gist of, an oil field that makes oil, but you're really trying to optimize it with data, right? Which is,
and then feeding back to an operations team that is implementing that into the feeding that back into the system to optimize output. I get that. I totally get that.
After I was laid off, I was, focused a lot on what I didn't like, but, my big highlights was really, mentoring people, helping out new engineers, onboarding them, and, just seeing them get these aha moments, right? Whenever they, they get something and they learn something new, right? Yeah. So for me, that is, my value that I will carry with me everywhere I go. And, part of why I'm doing this too is because I really want to inspire others as well. So,
yeah, I think maybe you already touched on this. Was there something that you thought would be really difficult that was maybe easier than you expected?
I'd say probably the interview. And like I mentioned, it did seem easier, but, with the easy came the hard, right? You kind of need to do the hard work to
do the prep. Yeah.
To do it easier. And, kind of like you said, you kind of over prepared for that Tesla interview, but I'd imagine, it probably felt a little easier for you too, once you kind of over prepared for it, right?
Yeah. The other part I tell people is that because I used to interview at Exxon a lot, and the behavioral based interview panels at Exxon, I thought were much more rigorous and intense than the panels that I was put through when I interviewed at Tesla.
Yeah, it was the same thing. Having done interviews at Imperial, it's very heavily behavioral based, which was, what I was kind of expecting, but it wasn't, quite as rigorous. But, the way I would answer questions is still in that behavioral based way where you kind of tell the story, right? Because
I think that's still
exactly.
That's why I'm trying. Sorry, you probably steal what you're just going to say, but those stars was the format that we look for at Exxon or Imperial, and that's that situation, task, action, result, and it really forces you into what did you specifically do, and then what the outcome of that discussion. You just realize when I interviewed at Tesla, we didn't do behavioral based, but so many people stop short of what they did. They provide this broad context, and they often talk in we's and hours, but never in I's and me. And then they often never get to the results oriented. Even sometimes I test people on it, and the outcome is bad. I'm you need to be thoughtful about. Or if the outcome is bad, what you learn from it, but thinking about, the results are an important aspect of a given situation you provide. Shifting to what do you think was harder? What was harder than you thought?
as a reservoir engineer, the core of what I did was looking at how oil flowed through rocks, right? And I had to dig a lot deeper than that to basically come up with, the running an oil field isn't much different than running an app, right? When I say it like that, it just seems so easy, but it took so much effort to really get into that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's probably like my skill set was kind of purchasing was transferable for me, which is like, I think actually is quite easy to sell. It's like buying an oil rig is not that different than buying a stamping machine. When you say it like that, actually is quite easy. My wife was like a completion engineer and, went to work for Apple as a program manager. And, she went to work initially as, building iPhones in a factory in China. And that was like very different than what her experience was. But, she had to spend a lot more time on the project management aspect, like working and managing sub-suppliers and the skills required to do that, cross-functional activities. And even like the example I often give kind of on her behalf that she talks about was she used to have to go to work on a helicopter. And there was somehow this dialogue happened in her interview that said something to the effect of, if you can go work offshore in a helicopter, you can probably go to a factory in China and build iPhones. And it's like, it's funny how those like story, and that was like kind of emphasized. It came up multiple times after she was kind of hired and in the company. And it's like, for that might be just like working in what's like a complex kind of uncertain environment and like being adaptive and these kind of things. But you do need to figure out how to tell that story or connect those dots. I'm curious to know if you think, this initial pivot will give you the courage to do more things like that. Not that you want to make a change right now, but I'm just curious if you have any perspective on that.
After, I made this pivot, I was like, all of a sudden this whole world opens up to you. And now the possibilities seem endless. And, now that, and also in discovering my value and how it really, like I said, transcends any industry, any job. And the possibilities just seem endless now. And in a way, like I think you said this in the last video, but this helping others thing, it just kind of becomes like a little bit addicting, right?
Yeah.
It's it's just what I love to do, and it's my value, and I'll wear it on my sleeve everywhere, right? And that just kind of gives me so much confidence moving forward.
Yeah. I agree, because I use this term like people put you in a box, and I think like the company is like trying to keep you in a box, that the box that's good for them. And so and they often use like, they were kind of like praising me, you're gonna have a great career here, you're gonna do X, Y, and Z and do this thing. And I'm like, that can be sort of motivating, but it's very constraining. They have a lot of control of your career and life. And it also just constrains the outcomes. It's like, maybe I could be this manager. It's like the height of my growth, or maybe I could manage these different business units. But it's like, it felt like very constrained. And even a lot of my career and life, even where I lived, was like largely out of my control. And I think when we finally left that aspect, leaving the industry was like company and industry, but then I think it's all those things coupled together that really like, okay, I'm like independent of this. And now I've retooled my skills at least once, and I can probably do it again or multiple times. And it just feels like you can do anything. All right. It's like, not to discount how difficult that was. I'm sure you're kind of going through a new learning curve, but it's like, especially if you've got 20 or 30 years left of working, it's like, man, that's a long time to be phoning it in my opinion. I'm curious to know, did you get help from anybody, like a career coach or like community, or did you do largely on your own to make the pivot?
Yeah, there's several communities I went through. So one is like this careers in tech community here in Calgary. They're all, it's a whole bunch of people in oil and gas all looking to pivot into tech, and it's all very, helpful. We're all helping each other. And then I did have, go with this other outplacement program called Higher Landing. They're all about personal branding, and they take that personal branding to like the next level, right? So that's kind of when I got like, really sold on that, and really, emphasize on the self-discovery of your value and what you really like, to really, light yourself on fire and, be able to express yourself authentically, right?
The last question I have is, what would you do differently if you had your time back, if anything?
I would say, probably have the courage to leave earlier and start my pivot.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to figure out what the core message is, but when my wife and I started a blog that we never really kept up with, but it was called An Engineered Life. We're both mechanical engineers, and the idea being that it was like we sat down on that park bench, which I put in one of the videos, and just said, what do we want our life to look like? And we realized that, we weren't doing it through rose-colored glasses, that it would be perfect, but it was like, let's look at the options that are on the table and try and design the life we want. And it's taken
It's
time.
such an engineer thing to do.
Exactly. It's like we did pros cons list and made a matrix to do that. And it's like, all right, well, I want to say thanks to Adrian for taking the time today. It was a great discussion. I think I'm definitely going to take that tagline of running an oil field is not that much different than running an app. So I want to say thank you for the time today, and look forward to sharing more stories like this in the near future. Thanks, Adrian.
Thank you, Greg.